I'm Elena Rodriguez, 34, standing in my childhood bedroom staring at my dress blues hanging in the closet, the same uniform they've never seen me wear because every time I've tried to share my world with them, I'm met with patronizing smiles and comments about my phase. Tonight is my sister Carmen's engagement party, and I'm debating whether to wear the simple black dress that won't draw attention or the uniform that represents 15 years of saving lives they know nothing about. Before I tell you what happened when I finally chose authenticity over invisibility, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and stay with me because this story proves that sometimes the biggest heroes are hiding in plain sight. Growing up as Elena Rodriguez in the Castro family meant living in the shadow of impossible expectations. My parents, Miguel and Rosa Castro, built their American dream from nothing, Dad working his way from janitor to hospital administrator, Mom becoming head nurse at the same facility where they met. Success in our family was measured in degrees, salary figures, and social status. Carmen, my younger sister by 3 years, understood this language fluently. Valedictorian, full scholarship to medical school, now a pediatric surgeon engaged to David Chin, an investigative journalist whose exposés have won state awards. She was the daughter who made sense, who followed the script, who made my parents' sacrifices worthwhile. Then there was me. The daughter who chose chaos over order, danger over safety, service over status. When I announced at 18 that I was joining the fire academy instead of accepting the pre-med track at State University, my mother actually laughed. Not cruel laughter, just the bewildered sound of someone trying to process an impossible statement. Mija, she said, still chuckling, firefighting is for men who couldn't do anything else. You're too smart for that. My father was less diplomatic. You want to throw away everything we worked for so you can play with fire trucks? He asked, his voice rising with each word. The conversation ended with my mother crying and my father refusing to speak to me for 2 weeks. The fire academy was brutal. Not just the physical demands, the 12-hour days, the 100-pound gear, the simulated rescues in buildings filled with smoke so thick you couldn't see your own hands. It was the constant proving. Proving I belonged in a brotherhood that had never seen someone like me. Proving I could carry a 200-pound man down a ladder. Proving I wasn't there to fill a quota or make a statement, but because I had something fire couldn't burn out of me, the need to run toward danger when everyone else was running away. My family attended my graduation from the academy, sitting in the back row like reluctant attendees at a funeral. When Chief Martinez called my name and I walked across that stage in full gear, my mother clapped politely. My father checked his watch. Carmen took a photo but never posted it anywhere. After the ceremony, they congratulated me with the same enthusiasm they'd show for a participation trophy. We're proud you finished what you started, Mom said, the words carefully chosen to avoid saying she was proud of what I'd become. The first few years on the job were a learning curve steeper than anything the academy had prepared me for. Station 19 was located in one of the city's most challenging districts, a mix of aging industrial buildings, low-income housing projects, and new development that brought its own set of hazards. The crew was skeptical at first. Not because I was a woman, but because I was the rookie who had to prove herself every single day. Captain Morrison, a 30-year veteran with hands like leather and a voice that could cut through sirens, became my mentor not through kindness but through relentless standards. Rodriguez, he'd say after every call, what did you see that I missed? What would you have done differently? How do you get better tomorrow? It wasn't encouragement, it was survival training. In this job, good enough gets people killed. The first time I carried a child out of a burning apartment building, my hands shaking as I handed her to the paramedics, Captain Morrison found me afterwards sitting on the bumper of the truck, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. You did good, kid, he said. Coming from him, those 4 words meant more than any medal. At home, the calls became dinner table stories that no one really wanted to hear. How was work today, Mija? Mom would ask, the same way she might ask about the weather. Busy day, I'd respond, not mentioning that I'd just spent 6 hours cutting people out of a multi-car accident on the interstate. That's nice, dear, she'd say, then immediately turn to Carmen to ask about her residency rotation. The contrast was stark. Carmen's stories of saving lives in sterile operating rooms were met with rapt attention and detailed follow-up questions. My stories of saving lives in burning buildings were met with polite nods and quick subject changes. The turning point came 3 years in, during what would later be called the Riverside Elementary incident. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind of crisp October day when the leaves were just starting to turn and the air smelled like possibility. The call came in at 9:47 a.m., structure fire at the elementary school, children and teachers trapped on the second floor. Engine 19 was first on scene, and what we saw made every veteran firefighter's blood run cold. Flames were pouring out of the first floor windows, and smoke was billowing from the roof. Inside, we could hear screaming. Captain Morrison made the call quickly. Rodriguez, Martinez, and Johnson would take the interior attack while Thompson and Baker worked suppression from the outside. "Those kids are on the second floor," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around us. "The stairs are compromised, so we're going up the exterior ladder to the classroom windows. Rodriguez, you're smallest, you go in first, locate the kids, and start passing them out. We'll relay them down to ground level." What followed was the longest 23 minutes of my life. The smoke inside was so thick it was like swimming through black water. My breathing apparatus felt like it was working overtime, each breath a conscious effort. The classroom was full of second graders, 18 children and one teacher who had barricaded themselves in the far corner. The teacher, Mrs. Peterson, was conscious but suffering from smoke inhalation. Several of the children were unconscious. One by one, I carried them to the window. The smallest ones I could manage alone, cradling them against my chest as I navigated the debris-filled room. The larger children required creative positioning, lifting them over my shoulder, supporting their weight against my back, whatever worked to get them to safety. With each trip, the heat intensified. With each trip, the floor grew more unstable. By the time I reached the last child, a little boy named Marcus who couldn't have weighed more than 60 pounds but felt like a lead weight as I struggled through the smoke, my gear was so hot it was burning through my jacket. The news coverage of the Riverside Elementary rescue was extensive. Local news ran the story for 3 days straight. The footage showed firefighters passing children down ladders, parents reuniting with their kids, and heroes emerging from smoke-filled buildings. What it didn't show was my face. Every shot was either from behind, obscured by gear, or focused on the children we were saving. The headlines read, "Local firefighters save 18 children from school blaze," but no individual names were mentioned. In the interviews afterward, Captain Morrison and the department spokesperson fielded all the questions. At home, my family watched the coverage with interest, but not recognition. "Can you imagine," my mother said, shaking her head at the television, "what those brave firefighters went through to save those babies?" I sat on the couch beside her, my hands still bandaged from minor burns, watching footage of myself disappearing into smoke, and said nothing. Carmen commented on how amazing the rescue was, how those firefighters were real heroes. My father nodded approvingly. "Now that's meaningful work," he said. "Saving innocent lives." I cleared my throat. "I was there," I said quietly. "That was my station, my crew." The room fell silent for a moment. Then my mother patted my hand sympathetically. "I'm sure you did your part, Mija. It must have been scary to watch from outside." "I wasn't watching from outside, Mom. I was the one carrying those kids out of the building." Carmen looked at me with a mixture of confusion and gentle skepticism. "Elena, you don't need to exaggerate. We're not saying firefighters aren't heroes. We're just saying this particular rescue was really something special." I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo Chief Martinez had taken after the call, me sitting on the tailgate of the truck, covered in soot, oxygen mask around my neck, looking exhausted but relieved. They studied it like they were trying to solve a puzzle. "This is you?" Dad asked, squinting at the screen. "That's me. But the news said it was experienced firefighters who made the rescue," Carmen said. "You've only been on the job for 3 years." The conversation ended there, with them unconvinced and me too tired to argue. That night, I made a decision that would define the next 12 years of my life. I would stop trying to bridge the gap between who they thought I was and who I actually was. I would do my job, save lives, serve my community, and find my validation elsewhere. If my family couldn't see me clearly, maybe it was because they were looking for someone I was never meant to be. The promotions came steadily after that. Lieutenant at 7 years, captain at 12. Each step up meant more responsibility, more complex incidents, more lives depending on my decisions. I started specializing in technical rescue, the high-angle extractions, confined space incidents, and collapse scenarios that required both physical skill and tactical thinking. My crew knew they could count on me. The department brass knew I got results. The media occasionally quoted me in articles about fire safety, usually identifying me simply as a department spokesperson. At family gatherings, I learned to deflect questions about my work with generic responses. "Same old stuff" became my standard answer. When pressed for details, I'd mention equipment maintenance or training exercises, the mundane aspects of the job that wouldn't invite follow-up questions. It was easier than trying to explain that last month I'd rappelled down a grain silo to rescue 2 workers trapped inside, or that I'd spent 18 hours coordinating the response to a chemical spill that could have poisoned half the county. The Riverside Tower collapse happened on a Wednesday evening in March. I was at home, just finishing dinner, when the tones dropped. All units, respond to 1247 Riverside Drive for a structural collapse with multiple victims trapped. This is a code red, all hands response. I was out the door and in my truck before the dispatcher finished speaking. Riverside Tower was a 12-story residential building, one of those mid-century concrete structures that looked solid but had been cutting corners on maintenance for years. A construction crew had been working on foundation repairs when something went catastrophically wrong. The entire southeast corner of the building pancaked down, trapping residents in their apartments and construction workers in the basement. By the time I arrived on scene, it looked like a war zone. Command was chaos. Multiple agencies were arriving simultaneously, fire departments from 3 neighboring counties, urban search and rescue teams, emergency medical services, and specialized heavy rescue units. Chief Williams, who had replaced the retiring Chief Martinez 6 months earlier, was setting up the incident command post when he spotted me. "Rodriguez," he called out, "you're taking point on victim location and extraction. This is your wheelhouse." The next 72 hours blurred together in a haze of concrete dust, searchlights, and carefully calculated risks. We worked in shifts around the clock, using specialized listening equipment to locate survivors, then carefully cutting through debris to reach them. The building was unstable. Engineers had to constantly monitor the remaining structure for signs of further collapse while we worked underneath tons of precariously balanced concrete. My team was responsible for the most technical extractions, the victims trapped in voids where traditional heavy equipment couldn't reach. We used pneumatic tools, hand-cutting equipment, and sometimes our bare hands to create pathways through the rubble. Every extraction was a puzzle that had to be solved under pressure, with lives hanging in the balance. The breakthrough came on the second day when we located a family trapped in what had been their living room, now a triangular space created by a collapsed wall that had been stopped by their overturned couch. Maria Santos, her husband Carlos, and their 8-year-old daughter Isabella had been trapped for 36 hours with no food, limited water, and air that was growing more toxic by the hour. The extraction took 14 hours. The space was too small for conventional rescue equipment, too unstable to enlarge without risking further collapse. I spent most of that time lying on my stomach, squeezing through gaps barely wider than my shoulders, passing water and medical supplies to the family while we slowly, carefully carved out an escape route. Isabella was unconscious by the time we reached her, dehydrated and suffering from the effects of concrete dust inhalation. I carried her out first, my body serving as a human stretcher as I navigated the narrow tunnel we'd created through the debris. Carlos came next, then Maria. When we finally emerged into daylight, Isabella was breathing on her own again, and the crowd of emergency workers, media, and bystanders erupted in cheers. The final count was 47 people rescued from the Riverside Tower collapse. 7 fatalities, all of whom were pronounced dead on arrival, victims of the initial collapse who never had a chance. For 47 families, the story had a different ending because of the coordinated efforts of hundreds of first responders working around the clock. The media coverage was unprecedented. National news networks picked up the story. The heroic rescue efforts were featured in magazines and documentary segments. Photos of the collapsed building, the rescue operations, and the emotional reunions between survivors and their families were broadcast around the world. Chief Williams became the face of the operation, giving interviews and accepting commendations on behalf of the department. In all of that coverage, my name was mentioned exactly once, in a list of participating units buried in the middle of a newspaper article that most people probably never finished reading. The photos showed rescue workers in gear, their faces obscured by masks and helmets. The interviews featured chiefs and incident commanders, not the firefighters crawling through rubble. At home, my family followed the story obsessively. They recorded the news coverage, shared articles on social media, and talked about it for weeks. "Those rescue workers are absolute heroes," my mother said over Sunday dinner. "Can you imagine the courage it must take to crawl into a collapsed building to save complete strangers? The technical skill involved must be incredible," Carmen added. "I mean, I save lives in surgery, but this is different. This is improvised medicine under the worst possible conditions." My father nodded thoughtfully. "It's the kind of heroism that restores your faith in humanity. Real people risking everything for other real people." I sat there listening to them praise the very work I'd been doing for days, work that had left me exhausted, bruised, and questioning whether I'd made the right call in a dozen different split-second decisions. I thought about telling them. I rehearsed the words in my mind. I was there. I was one of the rescue workers you're talking about. I carried that little girl out of the rubble with my own hands. Instead, I asked if anyone wanted more coffee. The years that followed brought more incidents, more saves, more recognition within the fire service, and more silence at home. I developed a reputation as one of the department's most skilled technical rescue specialists. Other departments would request me specifically for complex incidents. I started teaching courses at the State Fire Academy, training the next generation of firefighters in rope rescue, confined space operations, and collapse response. My gear bag became filled with commendations, certificates, and small tokens from families I'd helped, a child's drawing of a firefighter, a thank you card from an elderly man I'd pulled from a car accident, a photo of a wedding that happened because the bride survived a building collapse I'd responded to. These meant more to me than any official recognition could. At Carmen's medical school graduation, I sat in the audience wearing civilian clothes, applauding as she received awards for academic excellence and community service. At the reception afterward, relatives I hadn't seen in years asked what I was doing with my life. "Still working for the fire department," I'd say, and they'd nod politely before changing the subject to Carmen's residency placement or her relationship with David. David Shen had been part of our family orbit for 2 years by the time he proposed to Carmen. He was everything my parents had hoped for in a son-in-law: educated, successful, articulate, and completely devoted to my sister. As an investigative journalist, he had covered some of the city's biggest stories over the past 5 years. His series on municipal corruption had led to 3 resignations and 2 indictments. His exposé on unsafe working conditions in local factories had resulted in new safety regulations and saved countless lives. He was also kind to me in a way that felt genuine, not obligatory. While my family made small talk about weather and work schedules, David would ask thoughtful questions about current events, books I'd read, or places I'd traveled. He treated me like an adult with opinions worth hearing, which was more than I could say for most of my relatives. When Carmen announced their engagement at last year's Christmas gathering, the family erupted in celebration. Mom started crying immediately. Dad opened a bottle of champagne he'd been saving for a special occasion. Cousins, aunts, and uncles formed a receiving line to congratulate the happy couple and admire Carmen's ring. I hugged my sister and shook David's hand, genuinely happy for them but acutely aware of my role in this family narrative, the single older sister whose main function was to make Carmen's achievements look even more impressive by contrast. "When are you going to find someone and settle down?" Aunt Rosa asked me, as if my relationship status was somehow a reflection of my character or worth. "I'm focused on my career right now," I replied, the same answer I'd been giving for years. What career? She responded with a laugh. Playing with fire trucks doesn't count as a career, Mija. The engagement party was planned for March, exactly 1 year after the Riverside Tower collapse. Carmen had chosen the ballroom at the Marriott downtown, the same hotel where she'd had her medical school graduation party. The guest list included family, medical colleagues, David's journalist friends, and assorted family acquaintances who had watched Carmen grow up and wanted to celebrate her success. I received my invitation by mail, despite living 20 minutes away from my parents' house. The envelope was addressed to Elena Rodriguez, as if I might not recognize my own name. The invitation itself was elegant, cream-colored cardstock with embossed lettering that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. Dr. Carmen Castro and Mr. David Chen request your presence. I ran my fingers over the raised letters, wondering if this was what success looked like, your name printed on expensive paper, announcing your achievements to a room full of people who already knew how wonderful you were. The week leading up to the party, I found myself standing in front of my closet more often than usual, staring at the collection of civilian clothes that seemed inadequate for the occasion and the dress uniform that represented everything my family couldn't see about my life. I had earned the right to wear that uniform. The captain's bars on the collar, the service ribbons across the chest, the department patches that marked me as someone who had proven herself under the worst circumstances imaginable. But wearing it would be making a statement, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the conversation that would follow. It would mean explaining 15 years of silence, 15 years of deflected questions and minimized achievements. It would mean confronting the gap between who they thought I was and who I had become. The night before the party, I called Chief Williams. It was late, probably too late to be calling your boss about a personal matter, but he picked up on the third ring. Rodriguez? Everything okay? Chief, I need to ask you something, and it might sound strange. Go ahead. If someone asked you to describe my service record, what would you tell them? There was a pause. Is this about the mayor's award nomination? Because I already submitted your file for that. No, sir. It's more personal than that. If my family asked you about my career, about the kind of firefighter I am, what would you say? Chief Williams was quiet for a moment. Elena, you're one of the finest officers I've ever worked with. You've saved more lives in the past 5 years than most firefighters save in an entire career. You're technically proficient, calm under pressure, and a natural leader. Any department in the country would be lucky to have you. Why are you asking? My sister's getting married tomorrow, and I'm trying to decide whether to wear my dress uniform to the reception. Why wouldn't you wear it? Because my family doesn't really understand what I do for a living. Then maybe it's time they learned. After I hung up, I pulled the dress uniform out of the closet and laid it across my bed. The navy blue jacket with its gold captain's bars. The perfectly pressed trousers with their sharp creases. The ribbon rack that told the story of my career, the Medal of Valor from the Riverside Tower collapse, the Purple Heart equivalent for injuries sustained in the line of duty, the Community Service Award, the Life-Saving Award, multiple commendations for meritorious service. This uniform represented who I really was. Tomorrow, for the first time in 15 years, I was going to let my family see her. The Marriott ballroom was transformed by the time I arrived. Carmen had chosen a spring theme with white linens, yellow centerpieces, and enough flowers to supply a small wedding. The guest list was impressive: colleagues from the hospital, former professors, journalists from David's newspaper, and 3 generations of Castro family members dressed in their finest clothes. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. Carmen was radiant in a pale blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary, accepting congratulations and posing for photos with David at her side. My parents were holding court near the bar, telling anyone who would listen about their daughter the pediatric surgeon and their soon-to-be son-in-law the award-winning journalist. In my dress uniform, I felt both completely out of place and completely at home. The stares started immediately, not hostile, just curious. Most of the guests had probably never seen a fire captain in full dress uniform outside of a funeral or ceremony. The jacket fit perfectly, the ribbons caught the light from the chandeliers, and for the first time in years, I looked like exactly who I was. Elena. Mom spotted me first, her voice carrying across the room with a tone I couldn't quite identify, surprise, maybe, or concern. She made her way through the crowd, Dad close behind. Mija, why are you wearing that? Because this is who I am, Mom. Carmen appeared at my mother's shoulder, her smile freezing when she saw me. Elena, what are you doing? This is my engagement party, not some firefighter event. I thought I'd wear something that represented my career for once. Your career? Carmen's voice rose slightly. Elena, you're not even an officer. You're just a regular firefighter. Before I could respond, David materialized beside my sister, and everything changed. He was looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not the polite interest he usually showed, but genuine shock. His eyes went from my face to my ribbons to the captain's bars on my collar and back to my face. Wait, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You're Captain Rodriguez? The conversation around us stopped. Carmen looked confused. My parents looked between David and me like they were trying to solve a puzzle. I'm sorry, what? Carmen asked. David pulled out his phone, his hands shaking slightly as he scrolled through his photos. I've been working on a feature story about heroic rescues in the city, he said, still staring at me like he was seeing a ghost. The centerpiece is the Riverside Tower collapse from last year. The technical rescue specialist who saved the Santos family. He turned his phone toward the group, showing a photo I'd never seen before, me emerging from the rubble, covered in concrete dust, carrying 8-year-old Isabella Santos in my arms. That's Elena, he said, his voice gaining strength. She's Captain Elena Rodriguez, one of the most decorated firefighters in the city. She's saved dozens of lives. She's the one who spent 14 hours crawling through unstable debris to rescue that family. She's a certified technical rescue specialist, a department training instructor, and according to my sources, she's being considered for the Medal of Valor for her work at Riverside Tower. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clink of glasses from other conversations, the distant sound of music from the hotel's speaker system, but nothing from the circle of family members standing around me. Carmen was staring at David's phone like the image might change if she looked at it long enough. My parents were looking at me like they were seeing me for the first time. That's impossible, Carmen said finally. Elena's just a firefighter. She drives the truck or something. David scrolled to another photo, this one showing me in full gear coordinating with other rescue specialists. She's not just a firefighter. She's a captain. She commands other firefighters. The article I'm writing calls her one of the unsung heroes of the department, specialists who do the most dangerous work but rarely get public recognition. Elena, my mother said slowly, is this true? I looked around at their faces, confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Yes, Mom. It's true. But you never said. Dad started, then stopped. I tried to tell you. After the Riverside Elementary fire, after every major incident I'd been part of. You either didn't believe me or changed the subject. David was still scrolling through his phone, pulling up article after article. The warehouse fire last year where 3 workers were trapped in a grain silo, that was Elena's crew. The chemical spill that almost contaminated the water supply, Elena was the incident commander who coordinated the containment. The apartment building collapse on 5th Street, Elena personally rescued 4 people from the basement. Carmen sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Why didn't you tell us? I did tell you. Every time I tried to share what I really do for a living, you assumed I was exaggerating or changed the subject. It was easier to let you think I was just playing with fire trucks than to keep fighting for recognition that never came. The crowd around us had grown as David's voice carried across the room. Other guests were pulling out their phones, looking up the stories he was referencing. Someone found video footage from a news report about the chemical spill, showing me in hazmat gear giving a briefing to other emergency responders. Elena, Aunt Rosa appeared at my elbow, the same woman who had joked about my career not being real just 4 months earlier. I had no idea. You're famous. I'm not famous, I corrected. I'm just good at my job. David was showing his phone to anyone who would look. "This is my future sister-in-law," he was telling Carmen's medical school friends. "She literally saves lives for a living." Some of these rescues are textbook examples of technical skill under pressure. Dr. Martinez, one of Carmen's colleagues, studied the photos with professional interest. "The medical coordination required for some of these extractions must be incredible," he said. "Treating patients in confined spaces, improvised life support, field medicine under the worst possible conditions. It's like emergency surgery without the sterile environment." "Or the backup," I added. "When you're 40 feet underground in an unstable collapse zone, you don't have the luxury of calling for help." Carmen was quiet through all of this, processing the revelation that her older sister, the family disappointment, was apparently everything she had always claimed to be and more. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. "Elena, I'm sorry. I don't understand why you didn't insist that we listen. Because I was tired of fighting for space in conversations where I clearly didn't belong. It was easier to let you have the spotlight than to keep defending my choices." The party continued around us, but the energy had shifted. People who had never paid attention to me before were asking questions about my work, about specific rescues, about what it was like to make life or death decisions under pressure. David appointed himself as my unofficial publicist, showing anyone who would listen the evidence of my career that he'd been collecting for his article. My parents stood together near the dessert table, having what appeared to be an intense conversation. Eventually, they approached me together, wearing matching expressions of confusion and something that might have been pride. "Mija," Mom said, "we need to talk. Really talk." "We owe you an apology," Dad added. "A big one." "You don't owe me anything," I said. "You just didn't understand what I was doing." "No," Mom said firmly, "we didn't try to understand. We made assumptions about your job, about your life, about your accomplishments. We were wrong." David reappeared with a tablet, having found more articles and video footage. "Elena, I need to interview you for my piece. The story I'm writing doesn't do justice to what you've actually accomplished. I've been focusing on the technical aspects of the rescues, but I'm missing the human element, what it's like to be the person making these saves." "David," Carmen interrupted, "maybe this isn't the time." "No," I said, "it's okay. I'm tired of hiding what I do for a living." Over the next hour, I found myself answering questions I'd never been asked before. About the training required to become a technical rescue specialist. About the physical and mental challenges of working in collapsed buildings. About the satisfaction of saving lives and the weight of the ones you can't save. Dr. Martinez asked about the medical aspects of my work, and I found myself discussing field trauma care, patient assessment under extreme conditions, and the intersection of rescue operations and emergency medicine. Carmen's medical school friends listened with the same attention they'd give to a lecture from a distinguished professor. David's journalist colleagues wanted to know about the decision-making process during high-stakes rescues, about working with other agencies, about the politics and funding challenges facing urban fire departments. For the first time in my adult life, my family was hearing me speak as an expert in my field, not as the daughter who had chosen the wrong path. As the evening wound down, Carmen found me by the windows overlooking the city. "Elena, I need to say something, and I'm not sure how to say it without sounding terrible." "Go ahead." "I've spent my whole life being the successful daughter, the one who made the right choices, the one who made Mom and Dad proud. I thought that meant you were the unsuccessful one, the one who couldn't figure out how to be important." "Carmen." "No, let me finish. Tonight I realized that while I've been saving one life at a time in a hospital with backup and equipment and support, you've been saving multiple lives at a time under the worst possible conditions, often with nothing but your skills and your courage. I don't know how to process that." I looked out at the city lights, thinking about all the calls I'd responded to in those buildings, all the families I'd helped reunite, all the disasters that could have been worse if we hadn't been there. We both save lives, Carmen. Just in different ways. But you do it without recognition, without backup plans, without safety nets. You literally risk your life every time you go to work. So do you. Every time you operate on a child, you're risking their life and your career. She shook her head. It's not the same thing. When I make a mistake, I might lose a patient. When you make a mistake, you might die. And you've been doing this for 15 years while we treated you like you weren't living up to your potential. David joined us, having finally run out of photos to show people. Elena, I want to ask you something. Would you be willing to be the primary subject of the article I'm writing? I think the story of unrecognized heroes is important, but your story specifically, the technical expertise, the life-saving work, the fact that even your own family didn't know what you were accomplishing, that's the real story. I thought about it. For 15 years, I'd worked in the shadows, doing my job without seeking recognition, finding satisfaction in the work itself rather than in other people's opinions of it. But maybe it was time for that to change. Maybe there were other people like me, doing important work that their families didn't understand or value. Maybe my story could help bridge that gap. Okay, I said. Let's tell the story. The article ran 6 weeks later as a Sunday feature in the city's main newspaper. David had titled it, "The Captain Next Door: How Heroes Hide in Plain Sight." It included photos from multiple rescue operations, interviews with other firefighters and rescue specialists, and a detailed account of my role in the Riverside Tower collapse. But the part that meant the most to me was the sidebar David had written about family dynamics and recognition. He had interviewed my parents, Carmen, and several other family members about their changing understanding of my career. Mom was quoted saying, "We thought we knew what success looked like, but we were measuring with the wrong ruler. Elena has been a hero all along, we just couldn't see it because we weren't looking in the right places." The response to the article was overwhelming. The fire department received dozens of calls from people wanting to thank me personally. The mayor's office reached out about presenting me with a formal commendation. Other news outlets picked up the story, and suddenly I was getting interview requests from radio stations and local television programs. More importantly, the article sparked conversations in other families about recognizing different types of success and achievement. David received letters from readers sharing their own stories of family members whose important work had gone unrecognized: teachers, social workers, emergency medical technicians, soldiers, and other public servants whose contributions were often invisible to those closest to them. 3 months after the article was published, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening. "Elena, I've been thinking about what you said at Carmen's party, about trying to tell us about your work and us not listening. I want you to know that I've been reading everything I can find about technical rescue operations. I want to understand what you do, really understand it." "Mom, you don't have to." "Yes, I do. I owe you 15 years of attention and respect. I want to start making up for that now." The conversations that followed were unlike any we'd ever had. Mom asked detailed questions about my training, about specific rescues, about the physical and emotional challenges of the job. She wanted to know about my colleagues, about department politics, about my plans for advancement within the service. Dad started introducing me differently at family gatherings. Instead of, "This is Elena, she works for the fire department," it became, "This is my daughter Elena, she's a fire captain and one of the city's top rescue specialists." The change in language was small, but the change in attitude was enormous. Carmen and I developed a new relationship built on mutual respect rather than unspoken competition. She started asking for my input on emergency medical procedures, recognizing that my field experience with trauma patients often provided perspectives that classroom learning couldn't match. I started asking her about the medical aspects of injuries I'd seen in rescue situations, gaining insights that made me more effective at patient care during extractions. The most unexpected change came from David, who became genuinely interested in emergency services reporting. He started covering fire department stories with a depth and understanding that other journalists rarely brought to the subject. His follow-up articles about departmental funding, training programs, and the challenges facing urban firefighters helped bring public attention to issues we'd been dealing with for years without adequate support. 6 months after Carmen's engagement party, I was promoted to battalion chief. The ceremony was held at the downtown fire station, with full honors and a crowd that included not just my colleagues but my entire family. Mom cried when Chief Williams pinned the new insignia on my collar. Dad stood at attention during the national anthem like he was at a military ceremony. Carmen brought her medical colleagues, introducing me as her sister, the fire chief. The speech I gave that day was brief, but it included something I'd never said publicly before. This promotion represents not just personal advancement, but recognition of the work that many of us do every day without seeking credit or acclaim. We save lives not for the recognition, but because someone has to. Today I'm grateful to be surrounded by people who finally understand that this isn't just what I do, it's who I am. After the ceremony, as we gathered for the traditional reception in the station's apparatus bay, Chief Williams pulled me aside. "Elena, there's something I want to discuss with you. The State Fire Marshal's office has been looking for someone to head up their new urban search and rescue program. It would mean a significant promotion, state-level responsibility, and the chance to train firefighters from departments across the region. Chief, I appreciate the opportunity, but I'm not sure I'm ready to leave Station 19. Think about it. You've given 15 years to this department, and you've proven yourself beyond any doubt. But there are other firefighters out there, other people like you who could benefit from your experience and leadership. The program would let you train the next generation of rescue specialists." That night, I sat in my apartment looking out at the city lights, thinking about the path that had brought me here. 15 years earlier, I had chosen a career that my family couldn't understand, pursuing work that fulfilled me even when it brought no recognition from the people whose opinions I valued most. I had saved lives, trained colleagues, advanced through the ranks, and become exactly the kind of firefighter I'd dreamed of being when I first walked into the academy. The recognition from my family had been gratifying, but I realized it wasn't what had been missing from my life. What had been missing was my own willingness to stand fully in my truth, to wear my achievements openly rather than hiding them to avoid conflict. The dress uniform hanging in my closet wasn't just fabric and insignia, it was a symbol of everything I'd accomplished and everything I'd earned the right to be proud of. I accepted the position with the State Fire Marshal's office, beginning a new chapter that would let me impact emergency services on a broader scale while staying true to the work that had defined my adult life. The press release announcing my appointment was picked up by several news outlets, with headlines like "Local Fire Captain Takes State Position" and "Riverside Tower Hero Moves to State Role." Carmen forwarded me one of the articles with a text message, "Still can't believe my big sister is famous. Proud of you always." It was the first time she'd ever said she was proud of me, and I realized that meant more than any headline ever could. The going-away party thrown by Station 19 was everything a firefighter's send-off should be: loud, sentimental, and full of stories that got more dramatic with each telling. My crew presented me with a custom helmet shield engraved with Captain Rodriguez, 47 lives saved, countless more protected. Chief Williams spoke about my contributions to the department and my role in advancing technical rescue capabilities throughout the region. But the moment that stayed with me was quieter. Martinez, one of the firefighters I'd mentored during his first years on the job, found me by the apparatus bay where I was loading my personal gear into my truck. "Captain," he said, "I just wanted to thank you for showing me what this job could be. When I started, I thought being a firefighter was about putting out fires and looking heroic. You taught me it was about solving problems under pressure and helping people when no one else can. You figured that out on your own, Martinez. I just gave you opportunities to practice." "No ma'am, you did more than that. You showed me that being good at this job isn't about getting credit or recognition. It's about doing the work so well that people get to go home to their families. That's what I'm going to teach the rookies when they ask me what it means to be a firefighter." As I drove away from Station 19 that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. The 18-year-old who had chosen fire service over pre-med hadn't known where that path would lead, but she had trusted her instincts about what kind of work would fulfill her. The rookie firefighter who had endured years of proving herself hadn't known she would become a captain and trainer, but she had committed to excellence regardless of recognition. The woman who had sat through family dinners deflecting questions about her career hadn't known that one day she would stand in dress uniform, surrounded by family members who finally saw her clearly, but she had persevered through the invisibility because the work itself was reward enough. My new position with the State Fire Marshal's office came with challenges I hadn't anticipated. Developing training programs for departments with different resources, philosophies, and needs required diplomacy skills I'd never had to use as a line firefighter. Working with state legislators on funding and policy issues meant learning to translate operational realities into language that bureaucrats could understand and support. But it also brought opportunities to impact emergency services on a scale I'd never imagined. The urban search and rescue program I was tasked with developing would train firefighters from dozens of departments in advanced rescue techniques. The protocols we established would save lives in communities across the state. 6 months into the new job, I received a call that brought everything full circle. A major earthquake had struck a city 300 miles away, causing widespread building collapses and trapping dozens of people in the rubble. The state was deploying a task force of specially trained rescue specialists to assist with the response, and they wanted me to serve as the operations chief. The scene was hauntingly familiar: collapsed concrete, desperate families, and the organized chaos of a major rescue operation. But this time, I wasn't just one firefighter with specialized skills. I was the incident commander responsible for coordinating multiple rescue teams, managing resources, and making strategic decisions that would determine how many people made it home alive. Over the next 4 days, our task force rescued 31 people from the debris. The techniques I'd learned during my years at Station 19, refined through training and experience, were being used by firefighters I'd trained to save lives in a community I'd never seen before. The ripple effect of expertise, passed from mentor to student to the people they served, created a network of capability that extended far beyond any individual firefighter's reach. The media coverage of the earthquake response was extensive, and for the first time in my career, I found myself comfortable being interviewed about the operation. When reporters asked about my background and qualifications, I spoke confidently about my experience, my training, and the department that had shaped my skills. I wasn't hiding anymore. Carmen called me after seeing one of the television interviews. "Elena, watching you talk about the rescue operation, seeing you in command of all those firefighters and resources, I finally understand what you've been doing all these years. You're not just saving individual lives, you're building systems that save lives. You're creating other heroes." "I'm just doing my job, Carmen." "No, you're doing much more than that. You're proving that heroism isn't about individual glory, it's about collective impact. The people those firefighters rescued will never know your name, but they're alive because you trained the people who saved them." That conversation helped me understand something important about the path I'd chosen. The recognition I'd craved from my family for so many years had been about validation, about having them see and appreciate my individual achievements. But the work itself had always been about something larger, about building capability, sharing knowledge, and creating systems that protected communities. The dress uniform hanging in my closet now carries different insignia: state-level rank, ribbons representing broader responsibilities, symbols of leadership that extend beyond any single department. But it represents the same commitment to service that drove me to crawl through rubble to reach trapped children, to spend 14 hours extracting a family from a collapsed building, to risk my life repeatedly for people I'd never met. 2 years into my state position, I was invited to speak at the annual conference of the International Association of Fire Chiefs. The topic was building technical rescue capabilities in small departments, but the subtext was about the hidden heroes of the fire service, the specialists whose work rarely makes headlines but whose skills and dedication save lives every day. Standing at the podium in front of 800 fire chiefs from around the world, I thought about the journey that had brought me there. The family that had once dismissed my career was now following my professional achievements with pride and interest. The sister who had once questioned my accomplishments was now married to a journalist who regularly consulted me for expertise on emergency services stories. But more importantly, I had learned to find my own validation in the work itself. The families reunited after disasters, the firefighters trained to handle complex rescues, the communities better protected because of programs I'd developed. These were the measures of success that truly mattered. 20 years ago, I told the audience, I chose fire service over medicine because I believed that running toward danger when others run away was a calling worth answering. I've never regretted that choice, even when it meant years of working without recognition or understanding from the people closest to me. The work itself has always been reward enough. The standing ovation that followed felt different from the applause at Carmen's engagement party. This was recognition from peers who understood the sacrifices and challenges of the profession, who knew what it meant to make life or death decisions under pressure, who shared the commitment to protecting communities regardless of personal cost. After the conference, I flew back home and drove straight to my parents' house. It was Sunday evening, and the family dinner I'd once dreaded was now something I looked forward to. The conversations were different now, deeper, more respectful, built on genuine interest rather than polite obligation. "How was the conference, Mija?" Mom asked as she sat another place at the table. "Inspiring. I met chiefs from departments all over the world, people dealing with the same challenges we face here but finding innovative solutions. I learned about new technologies, new training methods, new ways to keep firefighters safe while they're protecting their communities." Carmen and David were there, as they usually were for Sunday dinners. David had become something of a fire service expert himself through his continued reporting on emergency services issues. His articles about departmental funding challenges, equipment needs, and training requirements had helped generate public support for improved fire protection services throughout the region. "Elena," Dad said, "I was talking to my friend Roberto at the hospital yesterday. His nephew is thinking about becoming a firefighter, and Roberto asked if I knew anyone who could tell him what the job is really like. I told him I know exactly the right person. It was a small thing, my father recommending me as an expert in my field, but it represented a fundamental shift in how my family saw me. I was no longer the daughter who had made questionable choices, but the daughter who had built expertise and could guide others who were considering the same path." That evening, as we sat around the dinner table sharing stories about our work weeks, I reflected on how dramatically our family dynamics had changed. Carmen talked about a difficult surgery she'd performed, asking for my input on the trauma care aspects. David described an investigation he was working on, seeking my perspective on emergency response protocols. My parents asked thoughtful questions about my conference presentation and the challenges facing firefighters in rural departments. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely seen and valued by my family. Not because I had changed who I was, but because they had finally learned to see clearly who I had always been. 3 months later, I received a call that would test everything I'd learned about leadership, technical skill, and grace under pressure. A massive industrial accident had occurred at a chemical plant 50 miles from the state capital. Multiple explosions had collapsed several buildings, started fires that were resistant to conventional suppression methods, and released toxic chemicals that created an exclusion zone around the entire facility. 43 workers were unaccounted for, presumably trapped in various parts of the facility. The incident was beyond the capability of any single department to handle. It required specialized resources, technical expertise, and coordination between multiple agencies that had never worked together before. As the state's senior technical rescue specialist, I was named incident commander for the rescue operations. It was the largest, most complex incident I'd ever managed, with stakes that couldn't be higher and challenges that pushed every system and protocol to its limits. The operation lasted 6 days. We rescued 37 of the 43 missing workers, working around the clock in hazardous conditions that required constant monitoring for chemical exposure, structural collapse, and explosive hazards. The techniques I'd learned crawling through the rubble of Riverside Tower, refined through years of training and experience, were adapted to meet challenges no training exercise had ever simulated. The media coverage was international. Chemical plant disasters are rare, but when they occur, they test the emergency response capabilities of entire regions. The successful rescue of 37 workers from what initially appeared to be an unsurvivable situation became a case study in technical rescue operations and multi-agency coordination. This time, when reporters interviewed me about the operation, I spoke not just as a firefighter describing tactical operations, but as a leader explaining how systems, training, and coordination make the impossible possible. The interviews were picked up by news outlets around the world, and for several weeks, I found myself representing not just my department or my state, but the entire profession of emergency services. Carmen called me after seeing one of the international news segments. "Elena, I just watched you being interviewed by CNN about the chemical plant rescue. Do you realize that you're probably the most famous firefighter in the country right now?" "I'm not famous, Carmen. I'm just the person who happened to be in charge when something big happened." "No, you're more than that. You're the face of expertise under pressure. When people think about what it means to be a hero, they're going to picture you explaining how your team saved those workers." I thought about that conversation for a long time afterward. Fame had never been what I was seeking when I chose fire service 20 years earlier. Recognition from my family had mattered to me, but even that hadn't been the driving force behind my career choices. What had always motivated me was the work itself, the problem-solving, the life-saving, the service to community. But I was beginning to understand that visibility could serve a purpose beyond personal validation. If my story helped other people pursue careers in emergency services, or helped families better understand and support their relatives who chose these paths, then the attention was serving something larger than my own ego. 6 months after the chemical plant incident, I received an unexpected call from Chief Williams, my former boss at the city fire department. "Elena, I have a proposition for you. The department is creating a new position, Assistant Chief for Special Operations. It would put you in charge of all technical rescue operations for the city, with a mandate to develop regional partnerships and training programs. Essentially, you'd be doing what you're doing at the state level, but with operational command authority and a bigger budget." It was an offer I hadn't expected and wasn't sure I wanted. My state position was challenging and rewarding, with influence that extended far beyond any single community. But there was something appealing about returning to direct operational command, about being the person making tactical decisions during active incidents rather than developing policy and training programs for others to implement. "Chief, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm ready to leave the state position." "Think about it. You've proven yourself at every level: line firefighter, company officer, chief officer, state administrator. This position would let you bring all of that experience together in a role that combines operational command with program development." That night, I called David to get an outside perspective on the decision. As a journalist, he had a different view of career development and the impact of different types of work. "Elena, what motivates you most? Developing programs that might save lives in the future, or being directly involved in saving lives right now?" It was a simple question with a complex answer. The state position let me impact emergency services across a wide geographic area, training firefighters who would go on to save lives in communities I'd never visit. The city position would put me back in the field, making real-time decisions during active emergencies, directly responsible for the outcomes of individual incidents. "I think I've always been most fulfilled when I'm directly involved in solving problems under pressure," I said. "The training and program development is important, but what I really love is being the person figuring out how to get someone out of an impossible situation." "Then you have your answer." I accepted the assistant chief position and returned to the city fire department after 3 years at the state level. The homecoming was unlike anything I'd experienced. A formal ceremony attended by city officials, department personnel from across the region, and media representatives who had covered my work during major incidents. Chief Williams introduced me as one of the most experienced and capable emergency managers in the state, and for the first time in my career, I felt completely comfortable accepting that description. I had earned it through 20 years of service, through countless hours of training and education, through decision-making under the worst possible circumstances. My family was in the front row for the ceremony. Mom was crying, the good kind of tears this time. Dad was wearing a tie with tiny fire trucks on it, which he'd bought specifically for the occasion. Carmen and David were taking photos like proud relatives at a graduation ceremony. But the moment that meant the most came afterward, during the reception in the station's apparatus bay. A young firefighter I'd never met approached me hesitantly, clearly nervous about speaking to the new assistant chief. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you for something. 3 years ago, I attended one of your training courses when you were with the state. You taught us about patient care during technical rescues. Last month, I used those techniques to keep an injured construction worker stable during a 4-hour extraction from a collapsed trench. The doctor at the hospital said the field care probably saved his life." "What's your name, firefighter?" "Johnson, ma'am." "Engine 7. "Johnson, you saved that man's life. I just gave you some tools to work with. The courage, the skill, the decision-making under pressure, that was all you." "Yes, ma'am, but I wanted you to know that the training made a difference. There are probably people alive today because of things you taught firefighters in classrooms around the state." After he walked away, I stood in the apparatus bay surrounded by fire trucks and colleagues, thinking about the ripple effects of the work we do. The individual rescues are important, each life saved matters to that person and their family. But the knowledge shared, the skills taught, the systems developed, these create capability that extends far beyond any single incident or individual firefighter. My new role combined operational command with program development, letting me maintain involvement in active incidents while building the department's technical rescue capabilities for the future. It was the kind of position I couldn't have imagined when I first walked into the fire academy 20 years earlier, but it felt like the natural evolution of everything I'd learned and experienced along the way. 6 months into the new position, I received an invitation that brought my journey full circle. Carmen and David were expecting their first child, and they asked me to be the godmother. The conversation took place over dinner at their house, the same kind of family gathering that had once felt awkward and uncomfortable. "Elena, we've been talking about what kind of role models we want for our daughter," Carmen said. "We want her to know that success isn't just about following traditional paths or meeting other people's expectations. We want her to understand that sometimes the most important work happens when nobody's watching, and that real heroism looks like commitment to service rather than pursuit of recognition. We want her to know that her Aunt Elena is the kind of person worth aspiring to be," David added. "Someone who chose a difficult path because it was the right path, who persevered when others didn't understand or support her choices, who found ways to make a difference regardless of recognition or reward." I accepted the honor of being their daughter's godmother, knowing that it represented not just their trust in me as a person, but their recognition of the values and choices that had defined my life. The little girl would grow up knowing that her godmother was a firefighter, that she saved lives and trained others to save lives, that she had built a career around service and sacrifice. More importantly, she would grow up in a family that understood and valued different types of success, different kinds of heroism. She would never have to choose between authenticity and acceptance, between following her passion and maintaining family relationships. A year later, I stood in the same church where Carmen and David had been married, holding their daughter Sophia during her baptism ceremony. My dress uniform had been replaced by a simple blue dress appropriate for the occasion, but I felt the same sense of pride and purpose I'd experienced when Chief Williams had pinned captain's bars on my collar for the first time. Sophia slept peacefully in my arms as the priest spoke about responsibility, guidance, and the importance of surrounding children with adults who would help them grow into people of character and courage. I thought about the lessons I hoped to teach her, about the satisfaction of work that matters, about the importance of perseverance when others don't understand your choices, about finding your own definition of success rather than accepting someone else's. After the ceremony, as families gathered for the reception, I found myself in conversations that would have been impossible 20 years earlier. Relatives asked thoughtful questions about my work, about the challenges facing fire departments, about my perspectives on emergency preparedness and community safety. Carmen's medical colleagues wanted to discuss the intersection of emergency medicine and fire service operations. Most importantly, I felt completely comfortable being exactly who I was. The woman who chose danger over safety, service over status, authenticity over approval. The firefighter who had saved dozens of lives, trained hundreds of colleagues, and built programs that would protect communities for years to come. As the evening wound down, Carmen found me on the church steps, where I was getting some air and watching the city lights in the distance. "Elena, I need to tell you something. When Sophia gets old enough to ask what it means to be brave, I'm going to tell her about her godmother who spent 20 years running toward danger when everyone else ran away. Carmen, you save lives too. Courage takes many forms. Yes, but your courage is different. You chose a path that required you to risk everything, your safety, your relationships, your family's approval, because you believed the work was important enough to sacrifice for. That's a level of commitment I'm not sure I could have managed." I looked out at the city we both served in our different ways, Carmen in the sterile environment of a hospital, me in the chaotic environment of emergencies and disasters. We both found ways to make a difference, Carmen. That's what matters. But you did it without recognition, without support, without understanding from the people who should have been cheering you on. You found the strength to keep going even when your own family didn't see your worth. That's the kind of resilience I want Sophia to learn from. As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. The 18-year-old who had chosen fire service despite family opposition had become a respected leader in emergency services, someone whose expertise was valued by colleagues and communities across the region. The young firefighter who had endured years of proving herself had developed into a mentor and trainer who was helping build the next generation of rescue specialists. Most importantly, the daughter who had once felt invisible in her own family had found her voice and her place, not by changing who she was, but by finally allowing others to see her clearly. The dress uniform hanging in my closet was no longer a symbol of hidden achievement, it was a representation of open, acknowledged expertise and leadership. 21 years after walking into the fire academy, I understand that the recognition I once craved from my family was never really about them. It was about my own need to be seen and valued for who I chose to become rather than who others expected me to be. The real victory wasn't convincing them to appreciate my career, but learning to find my own validation in work that fulfilled me regardless of external recognition. Today, when people ask me about my career in fire service, I speak with the confidence of someone who has earned her place through decades of service, sacrifice, and expertise. I don't need to defend my choices or justify my path, the results speak for themselves. Lives saved, firefighters trained, communities protected, programs developed, systems improved. The little girl sleeping in her crib tonight will grow up knowing that heroes come in many forms, that courage manifests in countless ways, and that the most important work often happens when no one is watching. She'll know that her Aunt Elena chose a life of service not for recognition or reward, but because someone has to run toward danger when others run away. And if she ever chooses an unconventional path, if she ever finds herself defending her decisions to people who don't understand her calling, she'll know that authenticity and perseverance eventually triumph over doubt and dismissal. She'll know that the opinion that matters most is her own, and that work done with integrity and commitment creates its own reward. If my story resonates with you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family or had your achievements overlooked by the people whose opinions matter most to you, I want you to know that your worth isn't determined by their recognition. The work you do, the lives you touch, the service you provide, these have value regardless of who acknowledges them. Drop a comment below sharing your own experiences with family dynamics and career choices. Have you ever had to choose between authenticity and approval? How did you find the strength to keep going when others didn't understand your path? And if you know someone who might need to hear this message, please share this story with them. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your own definition of success, about the courage it takes to choose service over status, and about the heroes who work in the shadows to keep our communities safe. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, sometimes the people closest to us are the last to see who we really are, but that doesn't make our achievements any less real or our service any less valuable.